to start the meeting. Superintendent's report and information items, Mr. Nichols.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity tonight to have a conversation with all of my board and for the work that you're doing. We have several items that we do want to bring to your attention. The first of which is we're going to have Ms. Height present a first presentation of our 2016-17 guidelines for dress code, code of conduct, and dual enrollment. One of these items, the code of conduct, will be there will be a need for you all to take a vote on at the next meeting. This gives you a month to be able to look over these items and have questions, but we do want to present them to you tonight so that you will have some chance of getting an introduction. So, Ms. Height, if you would be ready.
Ms. Chairman, Mr. Nichols, school board members, these items that you were presented tonight are just for your review. And I would like you to know that we've been working on this with lots of different groups. We've gotten input from administrators, other division leaders here, and so this has just been an ongoing process for several months. I will just briefly let you know the Mecklenburg County Public School Dress Code is one of your documents. It is a separate document because that is not in our Code of Conduct. It is in individual school handbooks, and that's why I've just presented this separately, because the schools will put those in their handbooks. But I wanted you to have a copy of it. We also looked at Code of Conduct, dress codes from surrounding areas, and from that we kind of compiled what we feel like is best for Mecklenburg County Public Schools. So that is for you to look at. With the assistance of Mr. Mayhew with transportation, he was very instrumental in revamping some things in his previous school division as far as discipline is concerned, so we took his lead. And so we've developed elementary school guidelines and high school guidelines, secondary guidelines. So those are for your review. We have reviewed those with elementary principals and with high school principals, and we feel very strongly that this is the direction that we would like to go in Mecklenburg County to make our transportation department stronger and our students safer. So that's for you to review. Last couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to meet with SVCC, Tiffany Griffin, and teachers and guidance counselors and other administrators, and we have revamped the entire dual enrollment handbook. That is for your review as well, and we have this with blessings from SVCC, and we have upped the ante a little bit, and we believe very strongly that our students should be held to a high standard in these dual enrollment courses, and the things that we have in here are things that we are expecting to implement with fidelity. I will tell you that we're planning a meeting in August with all of the students and their parents to review this line by line with every single parent to let them know that what is in here will be followed, and if it's written, we will not make any exceptions. So we're going to go through that. We also are going to have a teacher meeting to discuss the rigorous nature that they should be holding in these classrooms. So I just wanted you to understand that we have sought input, and so this book has been completely revised as well. And then the last document that you have is our Code of Conduct, and I can tell you I've already made one revision since you got this today, because Mr. Nichols graciously supplied the letter that's going to now be on the inside cover page, and I've got that ready. So I am making some last-minute revisions to this. Pagination will be corrected once it's all completed. But again, this was a document that we had for Mecklenburg County Public Schools, but it just needed some review and some revisions. And so we have gone through this line by line with department heads and other division leaders, and we feel very strongly about what we have in here now. And please take the time to review this, because this is the one document that will be requiring your vote next month. Please, if you find anything that you would like to add to it or any comments for the Code of Conduct, feel free to email me, and I will make sure that I get all of the responses or any input that you have to everyone who has had input on this. because again, this is not my document, it is a Mecklenburg County Public Schools document, and I want everyone to be on the same page. Any questions?
Ms. Chairman, Chairwoman person, I have a couple of questions.
Okay?
Are any changes to previous code of conduct, are they highlighted here, or are they just in?
No, ma'am, they are not highlighted, it's
Okay.
just,
It's just, this
just
is
the new document. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And,
We used the framework from the current one, and we just changed some of the language. We kind of reorganized some of it, reworded some things that just needed some clarification, especially with the truancy and attendance policies. We had some questions, several things that came up this year, so we tried to make it as clear as possible so that any person reading it, there would not be, any questions.
have there been any changes to the cell phone policy?
Yes, ma'am. The cell phone policy was reviewed, and I can tell you exactly what page that's
It's
on.
on
It's on
page
page 19.
19.
And again, the pagination on this will have to change once all the revisions are done, but currently it's on page 19.
Okay.
We looked at other school divisions and what they did, and then with the support and input from all of the assistant principals, and they spoke on behalf of their principals, this was the policy that we came up with. We also understand that, whatever we're holding our students accountable for, our teachers would have to be held to the same standard, if not, well, of course, higher in some cases. So, yes, ma'am, that was discussed.
Okay. And one other question on the documents that Mr. Mayhew designed for bus use.
Yes.
I didn't notice a signature page. Will that be included?
That's
with
in the
code?
student handbook.
Okay, so when they sign the handbook, they're adopting the bus policy as well?
The bus will also be in the handbooks, yes.
Okay.
And there is in the code of conduct, near the end of the book, let me tell you what page it's on. It's the next to the last page, on page 37. There is a statement in there regarding dress code, and there is a statement in there regarding transportation, and both of them refer to your student handbook.
Okay.
So you will have a reference to it in here, but you would find the full policy in your, or the protocol in your student handbook.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And I noticed the attendance policy for dual enrollment, 6 days per 9 weeks.
Yes.
Is that, am I
We
reading that
changed
right?
that. It was higher than that.
Mhm.
And we had a lot of discussion, and with SVCC, with their policy, this was the policy that we felt best suited the needs of our students. There's also going to be there's a note in here as well, that if a student misses 3, a required conference is going to have to be held. And again, that's going to be a conference that we have with teachers saying this is the new policy that you have to follow, and you're expected to maintain the attendance correctly.
So what is the policy? It's just 10 days, is it not for or is it 20 days for the school year?
20.
20, so that's basically, well, if you look at it per semester, that would be 10 is that the way you look at it? Or I guess they could miss all 20 in one semester, but.
That's in a regular class. We've also spelled out in the dual enrollment handbook that although they are a student of Mecklenburg County Public Schools, when they're enrolled in dual enrollment classes, they have to adhere to the SVCC policies, and that's where we've had some miscommunication. So we've tried to spell it out in this handbook right here very frequently about grading policies and makeup work and general behavior, because there's been some blurred lines there, so we tried to make it as clear as we could.
So when they're in a dual enrollment classroom, they have to be abiding by SVCC rules?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And that's a great idea to
Yes,
make
ma'am.
that very clear to
Yes.
them.
And please review that part, but I think we spelled it out several times to make sure that students understand, yes, we realize you're a high school student, but when you're enrolled in these particular classes, you have to follow those rules.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have.
Right, thank you, Ms. High.
What? Oh, I
I've
just,
got-
Wait a minute.
go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to point out, as we're looking at this, that a big part of the issue here is this whole component that the state is bringing to our attention of business and industry looking for persons who are prepared for a career in college. And that's not just an academic issue, that's also a soft skill issue, it's a disciplinary issue, it's the issue of students and parents needing to be held more responsibility as opposed to just teachers and schools being held responsible for issues. And through this code of conduct and the other components that are here, it's reestablishing what expectations are so that we'll be in a position to help with that educational part of it for the soft skills and other things that are in place. As you know, there have been a lot of questions about some of the things related to dress code and cell phones and everything else we need to clarify. And that's why we're asking you to take a good look at it yourselves before we make it our policy, because we will be asking principals and assistant principals and teachers to follow these very closely.
I do have a couple of questions. My first one, Mrs. Height, I would like to say thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
Moving us forward and getting our code of conduct where it needs to be. And I also look forward to you making sure that our teachers and our staff implement these things.
I'm
And
going to try
it's
my best.
held
Right.
responsibly to everyone. My first question would be the code of conduct, the dress code.
Yes.
Will that be implemented into the book, this page, a separate sheet that we've gotten?
The dress code, we have a statement, like I said, in the code of conduct, that's just a general statement, but then the dress code will actually go into the secondary handbook, and then in elementary, it'll go in each school's handbook.
Okay, but each student would have to sign. They would,
They have their own, yes.
okay. And I would also, because I have done some research on this since I've come on the school board, with some schools in Region 8 and with some other schools according, and I'm sure I'll have some other questions after reading all this for next month. But one in particular is the use of cell phones.
Yes.
On page 19. In talking with some other schools in Region 8 and again some other schools in other outlying areas, to me, cell phones are a deterrent for our students. It's more apropos for them to get into trouble. I know they're not supposed to be visible in the classrooms, they're not supposed to be used. But I'd like to look at it a little further and what we could implement as far as, not bringing them into the school, period, for it to be a deterrent for our students. I know some of the teachers will say, not many of them that I talked to, especially at Parkview and Bluestone, said, that they were a useful resource for technology. I didn't have many of those tell me that. But in today's society, it just looks like it causes more trouble than it does good.
We had that discussion the day that we went over the code of conduct about not having the cell phones in the building at all versus having them not visible. And we went back and forth with this, and the final decision was, and I will certainly go back to them and speak to them about it, was that there are teachers who do use their cell phones in their classroom. And they wanted to have the leeway to allow that, when they did not have access to technology, because in the high school, not everyone has access to a laptop or something like that at this point. And so they do use them for instruction. But again, if that is in fact the case, though, this would have to be followed to the T, as far as, when the teacher does not ask you to have it out, then you should not have it out. It should not be visible. So we will certainly look into that again.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons we're bringing it to the board. If the board determines that we will not, then it'll change.
Yeah, I guess my, thinking is that, if they had them, say they drove to school and had them in their car or whatever, especially for sports players or something that, after school, they needed to contact a parent.
Right.
But we have panic buttons in the classrooms, we have a telephone in the office. If a child were to get sick and needed to go home, then they would be able to go to the office and make that phone call and say, hey, Mom, I need you to come pick me up. But again, with everything that's happening in today's society, I just, don't want it to cause problems, and that's a lot of what I heard, and, you know, a lot of teachers didn't reiterate that they use maybe one or two set for technology, but for the most part, it was more of a deterrent than it was a help.
And I think and that may be true, and obviously that's what the information you have been provided. I think one of the things that came up in the conversations that we were having is that we had a policy in place and it just was not being followed correctly. And so I think with having these in place, with the understanding that this is the procedure and the expectation is it starts at the building head and it has to be followed. So, you know, where we would see kids in the hall with earbuds in and cell phone, if it says that that is not going to be the rule, then it should not be acceptable behavior, period.
And I think, Ms. Garner, I think that was the issue, is that some personnel enforced the rules and some did not.
Right.
And so when a child had freedom to have the cell phone out, that freedom may have carried over into another classroom where that freedom was not granted. And so everybody's got to stick to the policy if it's going to work.
And that goes not just for the cell phone policy, but for any
Everything.
policy. I mean, and that's one thing that, you know, when I was going over this with the group that I went with, I was very adamant. If this is not something that you can sit in your building and say, I'm going to support this, then we need to take it out, because I do not believe in just putting a bunch of words on a piece of paper that we're not going to follow. So, you know, I really feel strongly that if we put this in there, and we've gotten a lot of input, you know, from the key, you know, stakeholders, and, you know, then the expectation would be, this is now our policy, and we're all going to abide, all of us are going to abide by that. But I will certainly, you know, entertain any of your suggestions.
Again,
Because we want to get it right.
Right, and again, the only reason why I brought it up is because of everything that I have
Right.
done, being on the board in the schools I've visited. That's been, I've heard that a lot.
Right.
From teachers, you know, cell phones, it's a deterrent, it's a deterrent. So, again, that's the
Right.
reason why I'm bringing it up.
Shoot me an email and I will go through it. And like I said, I want to get this right. I think we want it right for our school division. And I think that's why we've put the time and the effort in with so many different people to make sure we are getting it right.
Mr. Palmer?
Ms. Height?
Yes, sir.
In your discussion with your administration, were there any conversation geared toward having a technology day or a technology day doing? A lot of schools are going to that now, you know, with all of the laptops and the different things like tablets and all, with technology being such a big thing. Now, we're not talking about cell phones.
Right.
I know cell phones could be construed as being in there, but I'm talking about some of the other ways of using technology. Did that not come up at all?
No, sir, it did not. No.
Because a lot of schools now are going to that.
Mhm.
They have 1 day per month or 1 day per week,
Uh-huh.
wherein that they are allowed to bring these things in because they use them.
Right.
What I would say is to read them carefully, because we're going to have to back the teachers.
Exactly.
And what we say and put in here, we're going to get phone calls if they're enforced. So read them carefully. If you've got any suggestions, let Ms. Height know.
I have one question. You said the staff was going to be guided by the same rules.
Yes.
What is their punishment? And is that just, or is it going to be worded you can't have personal phone calls during work hours?
Well, that's currently, you know, in 9 or 10 of the handbooks that we have now, where personal phone calls should be received through the front office. But again, it's a matter of whether or not it's enforced or not.
So that
Because
would
we
go
do
for
have,
Central office too.
excuse me?
That would be for the central office too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Height.
Thank you.
Ms. Nichols?
Okay, thank you. Next, we have a presentation about our request for supplemental appropriations from our finance director, Mrs. Pfeffer.
Evening, Ms. Chairperson, board members, Mr. Nichols. I'm here to request permission to ask for an appropriation to school foods. At the beginning of the school year, the beginning balance for school food was $505,000, and it was never appropriated to that category, Fund 2. So to close out the books at a balance that is not a negative, we need to go ahead and get that appropriated to the appropriate category, which is Fund 2, school foods. It's no extra money. We have the funds in the school food funds. It just was never appropriated to the appropriations in the fiscal year 16 budget.
Ms. Garner?
Yes.
The Finance Committee, Ms. Pfeffer presented the same information. Ms. Pfeffer submitted the same information to the Finance Committee, and we did discuss it with her, and we are making a recommendation that this appropriation be made.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any other questions? No, thank you, Ms. Pfeffer.
Thank you, Ms. Pfeffer. If you look on item C, bus routes, I'd like to bring it to the board's attention. I don't think I need to bring the first part of this, but the second part. South Hill Elementary School, Parkview Middle School, and Parkview High School are all overcrowded. And in looking at issues that we can take care of to fix those problems, we have discovered that for some reason, and nobody on staff was in position at the time, when South Hill Elementary was opened and when Buckhorn Elementary was closed, there was some redistricting and some students got moved. And we currently have two buses, Bus 1 and Bus 10, that should be, they're picking up students that are in the La Crosse Elementary School region, districts, but they're carrying them to South Hill Elementary School. And we will be asking the board to take a vote in July to fix this issue so that we'll have a chance to meet with the parents and others. We have 17 students on the Bus 10 route and 6 students on the Bus 1 route that are going to the wrong school. We want to be able to get in touch with the students and everything before we ask you to take final action on this. But we do feel like that will help. And then we have a number of students from both ends that are going on their own. I think it's been approved in the past, but we want to look at it again and try to work on getting students going to the school that they should be going to by our current districts. And I just wanted to bring that to your route. I have copies of the information that has been provided by our transportation department about who these are, and we will be working on this with your permission. I'd also like, as we're talking about this as well, though, that as Parkview Middle and Parkview High School are also overcrowded, we need to be looking at what we can do to make some changes to more evenly distribute the students in those schools, which would mean finding the appropriate ways to move students from Parkview to Bluestone on either side. Of course, some of that in the future, depending on the direction that the steering committee takes with the new schools, may take care of it anyway, but we currently have an overcrowded situation, and so we're looking at what might be done to rectify that. So that's for your information and for some action in July as we find out more about this. Any immediate questions?
I have just one question,
ahead.
Ms. Garner. We have to keep in mind that the elementary schools that are feeding our middle and high schools, because of the numbers at La Crosse and at South Hill elementary schools, those feeder schools to Parkview Middle and Parkview High, I mean, that's why. I mean, that's part of the reason why. And if we do move some of the students coming out of South Hill Elementary to Bluestone Middle and Bluestone High, we have to remember that we're going to be busing there. So the elementary schools that are feeding is part of the reason why we have the crowding situation.
Right.
I mean, it's just the way it is from a population standpoint. So We have to remember that.
Right.
And we're going to be asking families, you send your elementary kids to South Hill, but when it comes time to go to middle school, you're going to have to go, someplace else, and it could be a traffic issue, or, I don't know. I just think that it's just something we have to keep in mind.
Right.
Our feeder schools is what is messing up the
But I can
secondary part of that.
see too, because we've got students on Old Cox Road that are going to Parkview. Actually, I think they're closer to Bluestone. So that's.
Well, they go to Parkview because they attended elementary school
No.
on
they-
that end?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. And yes, Old Cox Road was a cutoff. And they went to Parkview instead of coming to Bluestone, and to me, it looked like they're closer to Bluestone. So I can see if you're going to change the population, if they're coming from an elementary school, it's best to do it to the middle schools where they haven't, gotten into the population right then.
So that is, I'm basically letting you know that administration will be continuing to look at this and bringing before you opportunities to be able to help with the overcrowded situation that we have at the East End schools.
One more question, Ms.
Uh-huh.
Garner. If the school district lines, why would the board have to vote on the bus route issue if the districts are already in place? That's the policy of the board. Why would we need to vote for you to do anything differently?
It's a good question. I guess it's just a matter of bringing
I mean,
it
if
to
we
your
were going to
attention.
change district lines, we would have to have public input.
That's true.
And make that happen. But if this is already county policy, and the students have just been bused to the wrong school, then I would think this is just a conversation that administration needs to have with those students that are affected.
Yeah. I'll agree.
And just fix it.
Okay.
I guess, it's the board's pleasure.
I'm not sure that the board didn't address it with a vote back when it happened. Because at that time, the turmoil was that we closed Buckhorn, and they had to decide where those kids were going. So they tried to, and we got the principal of the elementary school was here, so she may have a better answer than I do, but if I'm not mistaken, the board voted to put in place start moving these kids around, because I think La Crosse at the time had more kids down there, and we moved them up to South Hill.
Please.
Excuse me. When Buckhorn Elementary School closed, the situation that had taken place with moving some of the students from La Crosse to South Hill, that had already taken place. What we thought was going to happen was that when Buckhorn closed, those students would have been sent back to La Crosse at that point to fill in the kids from Buckhorn, but that never happened. So the children who were bused from the La Crosse area to South Hill, that was before Buckhorn ever closed. It was several years before that ever closed. If that helps. And I don't know if it was done with a vote or if it was done just, the lines were redistricted at that point. I don't know that part. But it did happen several years before Buckhorn closed. But then when we transitioned over there, they never got sent back.
Right.
Well, I guess my question then is, were the lines changed? And if they were, then, the lines that you have that go with
Right.
these bus routes, obviously, they're the lines. So I don't know what we would be voting on. I guess that's my question.
But I would agree with you as we bring it up in the meeting tonight, that if we have already policy that states, and a map that's been drawn that's on the internet for anybody to be able to see, and it shows clearly where the lines are, but we are finding that these buses are going to the wrong schools, then it would just be an administrative decision. We can no longer do this. We need to move them back.
And the other issue is, too, people need to remember that voting district lines are not the same as
Right.
school assignment lines.
Correct.
So the public needs to understand that as well.
Right. I had one other thing. I know we had ROTC as a,
I haven't got there yet.
oh, you're not there yet?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were moving right along here.
We will, we've got students.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I apologize. I just jumped the gun.
Yeah.
Well, are there other comments related to the bus routes that we'll be looking at again? Okay. Another item that we may be bringing to your attention for July consideration is the idea of our student liaisons for the school board. There's some question about the business, the business character of a school board meeting and the need to make sure that we're paying attention specifically to the business issues at hand, and the question of looking at no longer having a student liaison component for the school board meetings. And I'm bringing this to your attention tonight as a question, so again, by next meeting, you will have had a chance to determine, and we will take action on that. I'll be asking you to take action on that at the next meeting. Also, the question has come up about the opportunity for the ROTC program, which we know from our military has been regulated to 1 per county, not 2. It's been at Parkview for a number of years, and the question is, in fairness to the eastern end of the county, should we not rotate it and begin having the option of moving it to Bluestone, maybe on moving back and forth year to year or every 2 years or something of that nature. I think Mr. Edwards was looking at addressing that question, but we want to look at this and ask you to take a strong look at that and determine what we want to do with that moving forward.
Ms. Garner?
Yes.
If we go back to the item D, student liaison, and item E for that matter, Mr. Nichols, hopefully you'll be giving us your recommendation.
Yes.
On what you would like to see us do
Yes.
with those two.
At this point, it's been questions that have been brought to our attention, and so I just want to make you aware so that you can let me know your thoughts as we're looking to make that recommendation.
Thank you.
Any
And-
other questions on those? Okay.
Okay, and then, of course, we have the presentation of the end-of-the-year bills, as was mentioned before with the request for supplemental appropriations. This was brought up to the committee, the Finance Committee, and they will be making a recommendation for action. But I wondered if, as we have Mrs. Pfeffer here, for any questions that you might have, and you've had a chance to review them from the board docs, if you have any questions before we go into that.
None.
Seeing none, Madam Chairman, then I would suggest we move to the action items and turn it back over to you.
Okay. Under action items is the end of the year bills. I guess we'll hear from Ms. Bailey in Finance.
Yes. Ms. Garner, the Finance Committee did review the bills, and we had a few questions, and Ms. Pfeffer and Mr. Dalton and Dr. Majette were able to answer those, and we would make a recommendation that the board pay the bills as presented.
Motion to pay the bills?
So-
Second.
oh. Roll call?
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Honeycutt?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Edwards?
Yes.
Mrs. Garner?
Yes. Personnel, do I hear a recommendation that we accept the personnel?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes, with exception.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Honeycutt?
Yes, with exception.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Edwards?
Yes.
Mrs. Garner?
Yes. All right. Is there a motion that we, well, do the custodial supplies? Ms. Bailey, do you have a recommendation of who we?
Ms. Garner, I would make the motion that the school board approves RFP 2016-002 custodial supplies contract be awarded to Wilco.
Second?
Roll call?
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Honeycutt,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Edwards.
Yes.
Mrs. Garner.
Yes. All right, do I hear a motion that we approve the request for the supplemental appropriations?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Honeycutt,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Edwards.
Yes.
Mrs. Garner.
Yes. Before we adjourn, I want to remind that the July meeting has been moved to July the 19th, and your evaluations are due on July the 12th. Do I have a motion that we adjourn?
So
Motion.
moved.
We're adjourned.